This is The Raid, exposing the dark world of America's deportation machine. I'm your host, John Carlos Frey. On today's podcast is former senior Border Patrol and intelligence agent Jenn. She resigned in protest due to what she referred to as rampant corruption, brutality, and a rape culture that she witnessed and experienced firsthand as an agent. She continues to blow the whistle on corruption within the U.S. Border Patrol, and she's also an author with a recently published book called Against the Wall: My Journey from Border Patrol Agent to Immigrant Rights Activist. Her activism has not come without a cost. She's been surveilled and threatened by some of the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officers in the Trump administration. Welcome to the podcast. It's nice to see you.
It's good to see you again, John.
I wanted to talk to you specifically. Maybe you can orient us all on what we're seeing. My understanding throughout my history as a journalist with the Border Patrol especially was that they used to just patrol along the border or in border towns. Mm-hmm. People crossing the border, apprehending border crossers, processing them, deporting them. Now I'm seeing them on horseback in MacArthur Park in Los Angeles. They're alongside ICE. They're outfitted to the T. They're in armored vehicles. They're in unmarked vehicles. They're masked. They've got automatic weapons. This is not the Border Patrol that you were associated with. This is a completely different force. Can you just kind of tell me what we're seeing?
Well, I mean, if we go through the history of the United States Border Patrol, or the recent history of the United States Border Patrol, the agents consider people who entered the agency prior to 9/11 are called Old Patrol. And then people afterwards are called the New Patrol. And that's because it's a variety of reasons. The policies changed, obviously, drastically after 9/11. Prior to 9/11, the Border Patrol was basically kind of a backwoods organization, and not too many people knew about us or cared about what we were doing down on the southern border. And we didn't venture too much into the cities away from the border cities. But after 9/11, Border Patrol took on more authority. And so we saw a lot of the Border Patrol leaders when they were developing the organizations like CBP, which is Customs and Border Protection, and then DHS, which is the overall department of them, the Department of Homeland Security, started giving them more authority to deal with terrorism, even though the terrorists of 9/11 did not come through the southern border. They came through legally. And so what we're seeing is that militarization, and they did not want to actually be on the border anymore because they did not want to deal with migrants. And what we're seeing now, they're having the military now do that and handle the majority of that. So the Border Patrol's whole purpose, at least from the 90s on, according to what they were planning internally, was to do exactly what we are seeing.
So this idea that the Border Patrol jurisdiction used to be just 100 miles north of the border doesn't exist?
Well, the problem with that is that when you look at the map of the United States into how that law was written, it says 100 miles with any land or sea or water border.
So Los Angeles it's over 100 miles from the southern border, but not 100 miles inland.
Exactly.
From the ocean. So they can almost patrol anywhere.
That encompasses 2/3 of the American population when you actually look at it. So it's going to encompass all of Hawaii. It's going to have the whole island of Puerto Rico. It also means that Washington, D.C. is a border town. It means that New York City is a border town. Chicago is a border town. And that's what you're seeing.
What about, I mean, when I used to go through a checkpoint or maybe be pulled over by Border Patrol because I grew up on the border and that would happen. Sometimes they'd pull you over. Mm-hmm. You just had to say that I was a U.S. citizen and they would leave you alone. They would just ask, what is your citizenship? Where are you going? Those kinds of very simple questions. Mm-hmm. And then they would let you go. Mm-hmm. They didn't have probable cause to yank you out of the car and put handcuffs on you and throw you in the back of an unmarked van. So what happened there?
Well, what happened there is after 9/11, things changed drastically. So they started looking at, instead of looking at the people coming across illegally as migrants, They started looking at them as terrorists. The Border Patrol Union's vice president, he's now resigned, but the former vice president, Art Del Cueto, has said that anybody who crosses that border without inspection, he considers them to be a terrorist.
A possible threat? You're looking at everybody, brown, Spanish-speaking, as a possible terrorist?
That's what they want everybody to see them as. And that's been the propaganda that they've been pushing out. So the verbiage of the Border Patrol as far as being invaders and terrorists and stuff, those words didn't exist in the old patrol. And we didn't look at migrants who were coming across to find a Border Patrol agent because they would not be allowed to go through the ports of entry because they limit who can apply at a port of entry. And they've been increasingly limiting that more and more while telling Americans that there's a legal avenue. And so it pushes more and more of them to cross illegally. And the law specifically states, and it is still the law, that if you're seeking asylum, you can cross the border and you do not have to do it at a port of entry and flag down an immigration agent. And so in my day, I would process people seeking asylum and then we would have to send them to go see an immigration judge. But now they've criminalized asylum. So during the George Bush administration, we saw that asylum seekers could no longer cross. They started gradually making it so without incurring a possible charge. And then we saw that in the first Trump administration. So each administration, whether they're Democrat or Republican, is building up these systems, slightly changing the laws a little bit. And now we can charge people who are seeking asylum if they cross not at a port of entry. We can now charge them with violating 8 U.S.C. 1325, which is illegal entry without inspection. Now, it's a misdemeanor. It's still a misdemeanor as long as it's your first crossing. But if you have that first charge put down, then that enables them when you try and do it again to then bump it up to a felony. So they start to criminalize the people who cannot legally go to a port of entry when they're crossing. And so we just keep building upon that until we get to the point where, okay, let's take their children. Okay, let's do this. But I do want to say that a lot of these policies that we see today were in the old patrol, just in slightly different ways.
I want to summarize for myself.
Okay.
Because you said a couple of things. You are suggesting that what we're seeing out on city streets, then the way that ICE and Border Patrol are grabbing people, which feels very aggressive and militarized, is part of protocol and procedure, and it's just evolved over the years. It's gotten tighter and worse, and you also use the term propaganda. They've started to take a look at who's coming as a possible threat, as a terrorist, not just somebody looking for a farm labor job, right? So the threat is bigger, and so Trump is standing on the shoulders of laws that have come before him, and he's just turned up the volume.
Exactly.
These are all laws that have been on the books.
Pretty much. Well, the very first raid that was done by Chief Gregory Bovino out of El Centro, he went up to farm country just north of LA. And we were having fires going on in the Palisades. And he was right next door and decided to do the first raid. Now, in the South, if there's a flood or something, Border Patrol goes and assists. But because it's California and they hate California because they consider it to be a blue state, they didn't go and assist. They decided to do a raid. And they would say, this is a targeted raid. You know, every time they say this is a targeted raid, we know John is wanted for this and that, and so we're looking for John. But if we see other people, then we're going to take them too. None of these raids were targeted. And you can tell because they're just standing outside, you know, an AM, PM or 7-Eleven waiting for everybody to come out with their coffee, and they're just grabbing people. On the southern border, that's how we do it. We just grab people. We also ram their cars with our own cars. We're also taught in the field how to make them crash with pit maneuvers or blocking them in with our cars. And we're also taught how to get on the radio and pretend that we don't know where they are and we lost the vehicle when they're right in front of us, crashed, and then say, oh, I came upon them, and then we don't get in trouble. So there's all these techniques. So the techniques you're seeing in the cities today where they're ramming people with their cars, do that on the southern border every night, every day. but nobody cared because it was just aimed at people who were illegally crossing. Now we're going after people who are living in the cities that may have been brought here when they were children. They might not even know that they're undocumented, or they've been here for 30, 40, 50 years, working quietly, raising a family and stuff. What you're seeing is what goes on continuously down on the border almost every night.
What about what I'm seeing feels excessive?
Mm-hmm.
This is heavy-handed.
Mm-hmm.
U.S. citizens are getting caught up. They're using way too much force. They're masked.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have IDs. They're sometimes in plain clothes. You don't even know that they're officers or agents or federal officers. They're in unmarked vehicles. Mm-hmm. I mean, that all to me feels almost like a secret militia or a militarized kind of a group.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't feel right. That feels out of protocol to me.
Well, they've been doing it for decades down on the border. I was just recently researching a case from, I want to say 2012, Valeria Touchkeen. She was in an apartment when all of a sudden these men showed up, plain clothes, didn't see any badges, and they were trying to grab somebody in the apartment. And it wasn't her apartment. She was visiting a friend or a boyfriend, and she goes to leave. And they're like, ma'am, and they're not saying who they are. And the next thing you know, she has 10 bullets in her, and mother of 5 is dead.
A U.S. citizen.
A U.S. citizen.
So what we're seeing is just things that we've never seen before because it's always happened closer to the border?
It's happened closer to the border, and quite frankly, the media does not report it, and certainly the national media does not report it. But people who live along the border for generations will tell you, yeah, this is pretty much what it is.
So it's not shocking to you?
It's not shocking. They're even saying now we have had 2 people where Border Patrol has run in to grab people, and in fear they run away and they run across an interstate or a busy road and they get hit and killed. Happens constantly down on the southern border.
So this morning I see a social media clip with a Border Patrol agent, I think in California, in the Bay Area, with an automatic weapon, semi-automatic weapon, in what looks like Army fatigues, pulling or aiming his weapon at a child. That feels excessive to me. That feels outside of protocol. That feels like a violation of my civil rights. I don't know if the little girl is a U.S. citizen or undocumented. That's regardless of the point. I don't think that a municipal police officer would be able to do that to a citizen for no cause.
Is she a child of color?
She had dark hair, dark eyes, it seemed. What difference does it make if she's a child of color?
Because in the academies we are taught that the migrants coming across are criminals and that there's a legal way to do it.
This is in San Francisco. It's not near the border.
It doesn't matter. They consider, so even when the mass deportations started, and you remember the administration was like, we're only going to go after the criminals. And I kept thinking to myself, but we think they're all criminals. So that's the thing. That's the disconnect where they sit there. They've never really come out and said, we won't go after these people. They just say, we're going after the criminals. And like Chief Bovino stated when he first did it, he goes, we consider you all criminals.
I see. So,
and we consider their children to be little baby criminals. That's what we're taught.
It's kind of more of a military footing where there is an enemy as opposed to community policing where you're supposed to protect the public. Right?
Yeah, and we've been slowly, so like the old patrol agents like me would say, we don't recognize all this, but when you kind of like start to really think about how we did it back then, it was somewhat similar to this, but not as aggressive because we didn't have the tools and the resources and as many people as they have now, or the authorities that were given to them after 9/11. And so what they've done is they've just criminalized everybody. But the thought the entire time was, we are going after the people who are here that crossed illegally or even are out of status. It doesn't matter. They consider that to be a criminal. And then after 9/11, then you see more of the militarization. So then like a lot of the Border Patrol now is, and I think it's as high as 30% now, I could be wrong, don't quote me on that. A lot of the Border Patrol now is military from the Iraq wars and from the Afghanistan wars. And so they will sit there and say they are enemy combatants. So the way that they patrol the border is completely different than the way we patrolled the border back in the day. It's just more militarized. They are so fearful of being near that wall. They bring out their heavy armaments and all this other stuff. That is a different approach from civilian law enforcement, and immigration is civilian law enforcement. So they're turning around and they're taking the concept of military policing, enemy combatants, terrorists, and applying it to these people.
So if I'm a U.S. citizen driving down the street, which is another clip that I saw, I was stopped by a Border Patrol agent standing on the road with his gun pointed towards my car, asking me to get out of the car and get on the ground. And this looked to me like a semi-automatic weapon. Mm-hmm. I'm just driving my car. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I'm being forced without any reason to get out of the car and to get on the ground. Mm-hmm. And he's shouting at me and pointing his gun at me. Uh-huh. Don't I have a civil case here? Can I file some sort of this is against my civil liberties. I'm free in this country, am I not?
So the difference between immigration policing and regular peace officer policing is that the amount of cause that you need in order to stop somebody. And if you are close to the border, within this 100 miles, they can, and the Supreme Court just confirmed this, can justify stopping you based on the color of your skin. But they're supposed to need additional points.
Can you go a little further based on the color of your skin and a few other
few other things, which are proximity to the border.
What language you speak?
My experience as a Border Patrol agent says that this road is often used for smuggling. That is all I need down here. And honestly, the decision that the Supreme Court did, everyone's saying, well, they gave them the right to racially profile. They've had the right to racially profile for over 100 years. And there's been at least 2, I think 3 prior court decisions from the Supreme Court that said exactly what Kavanaugh did, and they're calling them Kavanaugh stops now, where it's only going to take a few minutes. You just have to say, yeah, I'm an American citizen, and you go on your way. But that Kavanaugh's a white man. He's a wealthy white man. He's a Supreme Court justice. So for him, they're going to go, okay, I never get stopped. Never.
Do they have probable cause if I work at a car wash?
They don't need probable cause. All they need is reasonable suspicion. So that's the difference. So when a police officer goes to stop you for a traffic violation or something, they at least have to think they saw you violating something. Like, I thought your seatbelt was off, but now I see it on. Fine, whatever, blah, 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 be careful. But that would be probable cause. So they're under the impression that a crime or infraction has been committed, and therefore that gives them the reason to stop you. Border Patrol, ICE, and CBP immigration agents do not need that. They just need the color of your skin and the fact that a lot of undocumented people live in this area, and they're poor, and they work at car washes because they can't get regular jobs.
Where's the 14th Amendment here?
It doesn't exist down here on the border.
We're not on the border. You keep saying the border.
I know, but according to them, it's within 100 miles of any...
But it's also happening in the interior with ICE.
Yeah, ICE can go into the interior more. But see, now, because of after 9/11, as long as one of the members of your task force has that authority, so like we could say, Border Patrol's not supposed to go past 100 miles, but John, the ICE agent, I, the Border Patrol agent, you've asked me to be on your task force, so now I assume your abilities and you assume my abilities. And they've done this even with your peace officers, and that's why you see so many of your local cops and sheriffs taking on immigration powers. So they're swapping powers without any training whatsoever. So I saw a clip, I think last night in LA, and I'm not sure exactly where it was, but it was like a bar or party, a lot of Latinos. And it was apparently LA County sheriffs, but they didn't have any badges. They just had, a T-shirt on and then just a little sticker or something here that said LA Sheriff. So a lot of people were like, no, I think you're ICE. And they wouldn't answer them. They just said, we're LA County sheriffs. So what they did was they emptied the bar and took the people that they wanted, which all happened to be people of color, and then they put them in handcuffs, and then they asked them their citizenship. But once they ask them their citizenship, even if they say that they're American, then they can question that for as long as they want and hold them as long as they want. But because they're LAPD, at the same time, we're gonna run you and see if you have any warrants. So they're using immigration shared authority to do the initial stop and questioning, and then blending it into, we're going to check for warrants and stuff. I've also seen a recent video this morning of Border Patrol telling 16-year-old boys, give me your ID. I would never give my ID to a Border Patrol agent or an ICE agent, because you cannot determine citizenship by an ID card. You can't do it. And they'll say, oh, but if it's a real ID, Border Patrol agents and ICE agents will say, well, how do we know that you used real documents to get this? We need to investigate further. And they can hold you for as long as they want.
You don't see lines being blurred here?
Oh, I see huge lines being blurred here. That's the problem. And honestly, the test case for this blurring of these authorities was Texas's Lone Star operation. So years ago, I was doing recordings on my podcast and about people who were getting stopped by Texas DPS, and the initial stop is based on the color of their skin and their proximity to the border, and that was it. But they don't really have that authority. They just assume the authority. Immigration is a federal authority. It has to be given by the federal government to the states and to the local departments.
Operation Lone Star DPS is
Department of Public Services. So it's like Texas state troopers.
And they gave themselves, the governor gave them the authority to be immigration officers. I'm hearing you say that Trump is basically following the letter of the law.
He's not necessarily following the letter of the law, but he's extending what past administrations have already allowed to happen. So the concept of the military being on the border, everybody says, well, that can't happen because of posse comitatus, which means that the military is not allowed to do civilian actions. And like I said, immigration is civilian policing. It's not military policing. So, but what they've done over the years, and I can even remember during the Clinton administration, we had military on the border. They were building the fence, but then we would also sometimes take them and say, well, they're going to do scope truck, or they're going to do a medic thing, or they're going to. So each administration keeps expanding what the military is doing. And quite honestly, the deterrence policies that came with the Clinton administration in the 90s that have killed tens of thousands of migrants out on our southern border, that policy to severely restrict who could legally enter the ports of entry, to push them out to the most dangerous places where we know it's going to cause them physical harm, that was actually a Department of Defense proposal.
There were military on the border when there was actually a shooting. A military officer fired his weapon and killed a civilian, a boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
25 years ago.
Yeah.
So this has been going on on the border, out of sort of eyeshot from the media.
Yeah, for even longer than, back in the day when I was an agent.
So I want to know where you see the lines being blurred. Where is it becoming excessive? I am concerned that people's rights are being violated, but I don't really see it in the courts. Nobody seems to be able to stop the raids. They continue. The courts don't seem to be able to block them. So I'm assuming they're relying on laws that are already on the books, protocol that's on the books. Where do you see excessive use of force? Where do you see them going outside their jurisdiction or sort of against what we would all consider to be civil liberties? I don't want to live in a country where I go out and I may be apprehended for no reason. I mean, who wants to live in a country? But that's what I'm seeing.
It's difficult to see where it starts, and I'm not sure why more people aren't bringing more cases on that side. But I mean, as far as the Border Patrol needs to be on the actual physical line of the border. And in my personal belief, I don't think they should be any more than 25 miles off of an actual physical border. And I don't think that they should be engaging in stopping people for traffic violations. They should not be. Their authorities are in immigration. narcotics that comes across the border, and any goods coming across the border, and then terrorism. That's it. ICE needs to only be going after people that are deemed to be criminal aliens, or so they have like a criminal past or something like that. If we're going to stay with still having these agencies, then they need to be doing that, and not arresting people who are moms that have never been arrested in their lives. A lot of them don't even have immigration records. And instead of spending that money on that kind of stuff, they need to be doing what their actual authorities are. CBP needs to be at the ports of entry. CBP needs to be evaluating people who are coming in for asylum, because asylum is essential to national security. If you don't have an open asylum system that is robust and humane, they will turn around and cross illegally. That's what we learned in COVID-19 when they shut down the border. And so I think that at the very least, we need to take them and put them back in their places and stop having them go into the cities and violating people's rights. And we cannot live in a country with the U.S. Constitution where we think it's okay to hold people indefinitely because they're out of status, or because they didn't get an inspection, but they have not committed any crime. They've committed a misdemeanor, which is the equivalent of jaywalking in this country. It's just mind-boggling that we're doing this, even as a Border Patrol agent. And I have other Border Patrol agents that are like, I can't believe we're doing this. These people are not criminals. Migrants are not criminals. Drug dealers are criminals. And if the federal government really wanted to stop fentanyl, they would have CBP actually checking each container that came across. They can't do that, John, because if they wanted to inspect every single thing, they would then slow down the economy, and it would hurt capitalism.
It would take forever for a truck to get across the border.
Yes.
Back to interior enforcement and the laws. What recourse does a citizen have? I see citizen groups trying to surround people they don't want to get detained or arrested. They're not opening their doors. They're creating statements. Emergency response teams are telling people what they're supposed to say when an agent comes up to them. Don't speak or don't say anything. I mean, there's all this kind of information on how you can protect yourself from ICE.
Are you asking if somebody's undocumented, how do they protect themselves from ICE?
Or the general public. I mean, ProPublica just published an article that said 179 U.S. citizens have been swept up in these raids. Mm-hmm. So it almost doesn't matter. Violation of my civil liberties or the 14th Amendment, or you're saying that, that they shouldn't be in the interior enforcing these laws. They should be going after criminals, but that's not happening. That's a pipe dream.
Yeah, it's not happening because one of the things is they know ICE in general. And when I say ICE nowadays, I mean anybody who's doing ICE work, quite honestly. I don't care if they're with the Border Patrol or LAPD or whoever. If you're helping ICE and helping do this mass deportation, then I consider you to be ICE. And part of the problem is that the Supreme Court has basically decided that, number one, they have qualified immunity. So qualified immunity means that they're basically immune as long as they're following their policies, which are kind of loose and you can get around things. And unfortunately, the courts have been letting them get away with it. So when people ask me what they can do when they see ICE, at Home Depot, or they see ICE going into a community, what I always tell them is, number one, they want you to be violent. They're ready for that. That's what they really want. So I don't suggest you be violent, but I do suggest you overwhelm them with your presence. And that's what I always say, overwhelm them with your presence. In Compton, we saw this when the raids first started. Compton people came out of their houses and they said no more. There's been a couple other incidents where people have, in Chicago and stuff, come out of their houses and they're screaming at ICE and saying, "You're not the real cops, get out of here," and throwing insults at them. That's all great too. Belittle them, because they're wearing those masks because they know what they're doing is wrong. It's not because they fear for their lives or this or that. We haven't really seen ICE agents going down because they're fearing for their lives. It's because they know they're violating the Constitution. They know that they're committing crimes by grabbing these people off the street and holding them indefinitely. They know that ramming people with their cars before they have even perceived that somebody is undocumented, which even if they are undocumented, that's not a legal response. That's still a use of force, a violation of use of force. But what I recommend is you overwhelm them with your presence, and they will look around and realize they cannot control that many people, and they will get out of there. But I think as we've gotten along more and more, as they've increased their violence, that tells me they've changed. They want to make Americans afraid. So that's been the goal, is to make Americans afraid and to let them know this is coming for you and you better not say anything.
I just have one more question about what people can do. If you're asking for people to come out in mass to protect individuals and overwhelm agents by sheer numbers, that's a big ask. I don't think that
it is a big ask.
Individuals have that opportunity every time ICE is coming around to rally the troops and to get 100 people to protest. That doesn't seem possible. That's probably in rare circumstances where people get protected because of overwhelming by numbers. You're saying there's not much somebody can do.
There's not a whole lot somebody can do right now.
Even if I'm in a courthouse, a church, a school, places where ICE never used to go or Border Patrol never used to go, it's open season.
It's open season, yeah. It is open season. Yeah.
What about the use of force? That to me seems to be the biggest violation. It's my understanding that federal agents, are not allowed to use force, show of force, without a visible threat. If I point my gun at you, you can point your gun at me. But if I'm carrying a protest sign, you don't get to point your gun at me because I don't have anything that shows force. I'm not going to hurt you, so you can't threaten me. You can't shoot me with a pepper spray ball or hit me in the head. That a priest in Chicago who was blasted in the head for holding a protest sign.
I'm going to answer you like they're going to answer you. I think that you're holding that protest sign and you're really Antifa. And we have discovered that Antifa is a terrorist organization and it's been declared that. And you don't have a right to be out here. And I find what you're doing, it's scaring me enough, so I'm going to hit you with pepper balls.
On the threat of an idea of who I might be?
Yeah, they will go back to, in the first Trump administration, at least in San Diego and a couple other places, there were some violent actions being done by people who claim to be anti-fascist, Antifa. And they have used that. They don't consider violence that the right wing does to be violence. They don't consider the violence that they're bringing to be violence. They consider that to be they're defending themselves. They're protecting their buildings and all this other stuff.
But an answer to that point is there's no real such thing as Antifa.
I know.
But the administration, from Kristi Noem all the way to the president, are talking about Antifa as if it's a well-funded, well-organized, if there's a leader.
Yep.
This is a made-up boogeyman for all I can see. Every terrorism expert that I've read has declared that there is no organized structure called Antifa.
Yeah. And you see that. And people who watch normal news see that, but that's not who they're playing to.
So this is made up on purpose?
It's made up on purpose. They do not care. They are only going with a mindset of left wing is terrorism, Antifa is terrorism. They have some Border Patrol agent who was killed up in one of the northern sectors, I want to say Vermont or something like that. They're claiming that he was killed by a transgender gang. And I don't even know what that's about. That's all they see, and that's all the Border Patrol agents see. They are just ingesting all of this propaganda that every migrant that comes across is a potential terrorist, every, this and that and blah, 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 and we need to get them all out of here.
So to that end, it's a good way to sort of have our last segment of a discussion here about what I don't understand is to what end. Maybe I understand patrolling the border because we don't know who's coming across and the threat of terrorism or criminal nature, drugs being smuggled, etc. you might want a patrol there and you might want a security force at the border. But to do these kinds of raids indiscriminately, to not know who you're apprehending, to make up an Antifa-type terrorism group, to go with heavy force, to increase the budgets, I don't understand necessarily the why. Like, where are we going here? It's estimated by the administration itself that they've deported over 400,000 people since Trump took office. 1.6 million people have deported themselves, according to the administration. I don't know if those numbers are true. Right. I tend not to believe them. But let's just say 2 million undocumented people have left the country by force or voluntarily. 60,000 people in detention right now. So that's a large number of people in some kind of a prison system. I don't understand the why.
There's a variety of whys and answers to the why depending on who you are. If you're Stephen Miller, the chief, chief advisor of the president, Donald Trump's second term, the why is to make America white again. Because
that's kind of hard to swallow.
White people are going to end up losing the majority in voting.
Do you hear what you're saying?
Yeah.
$170 billion agency to get rid of non-white people?
Yeah. They sold the United States people on this idea that they're bleeding the system, which they are not, because they cannot get benefits. They sold it to the people that they're the reason why you can't afford to take your kids to Disneyland every year. So basically, I would say overall, the overall thing is that our Congress and our leaders have failed us.
I get all of that. That's not my question. My question is, if I create this paper tiger called an immigrant who's violent, who's Antifa, or the protesters are, or that they're invaders or rapists or whatever they are, and it's a paper tiger, it's not a real actual thing, and I spend all this money and effort to get rid of something that's really not even a problem, I don't get the why. Why are we going to such lengths to get rid of a large group of people, to incarcerate them, to spend all of this money, all of this treasure for something that's not even a problem?
Because they're making money off of it. They're making a shit ton of money off of it. Because the detention centers, which are now concentration camps, they get paid whether they are filled or not.
I'm a little afraid of where we're going. If we're just starting to turn up the volume here, if the funding is starting to come in, if agents are coming on board, weapons are coming in, I mean, they're going to ramp this up. Where do you see us a year out or 6 months out?
I see Americans being put in those detention centers.
I think I have an informant who's an ICE agent. Mm-hmm. And his thought about where we're headed is an authoritarian takeover.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trump is creating a police force, his private, personal police force.
Mm-hmm. He already has them.
And these raids are a way of testing them out, sharpening their skill set.
Yeah.
Because he wants to take over the government and have a military force behind him. That sounds crazy to me.
I was interviewed by the Border Chronicles, which is a really good group of border agents out of the Tucson area, Melissa Del Bosque and Todd Miller. They do excellent writing on border situations. And I said at the time, and I still believe, that at least the Border Patrol, I think, is going to become like a secret service, an SS, to the president himself. But everybody else is going to be running around. And it's going to turn, we saw the president recently release these 7 new list of what qualifies you as a terrorist. I think I meet quite a few of them because I talk bad about the government and I tell the truth about the government. And even like if you say anything negative about Christianity or all that other stuff. And so that's where we're going with this. And everybody laughs about it. But I fail to see that anybody has stopped Trump in all of this.
I bristle when I hear SS.
Yeah, I do too.
You're suggesting a Gestapo-style tactic, Hitler's personal secret service that would go in and pull people out of their homes and disappear them. Does that relate?
What are we doing now? We're ramming cars with people who just simply because they're black or brown, dragging them out of their cars. There's that video of that woman that they dragged her kicking and screaming out of her car, that they now charged her with assaulting a federal agent and stuff. Her family doesn't know where they are. Do you know when you go into their custody, you will not know where your family is for a minimum of 48 hours and quite possibly much longer. A lot of people find out where their relatives are after they've been deported and finally can figure out a way to call home and stuff. We're disappearing people left and right. And we have deported Americans before to countries that they do not know. We are already there, John. They are secret police. We're not allowed to know their names when they file their reports. Their names are omitted and all this other stuff. They're using propaganda. They're using violence. They're shooting and killing a father because he dropped his kids off at school in Chicago and claimed that he hit an agent and drugged the agent, and the agent afterwards is seen going, yeah, it's not a big deal, I was fine. But they killed him. Nothing's going to happen to that agent, John. Nothing.
The hardest thing about doing a podcast and hearing this kind of information, and I'm a little seasoned, I've heard this before, it's not the first time, and I'm not going to discredit you at all, but it's hard for me to hear you say these things that sound so outlandish. I'm trying to be audience here.
Yeah.
I want to tune out. I don't want to listen to what you have to say. It's really hardcore stuff. Mm-hmm. And if it's true, it's even more hardcore. I want to discredit you and say it's bullshit, right? I just don't want to believe that this is happening in my country. So I want to tune you out. Yeah. Do you have any thought about how or what we should do to try and get people to pay attention? Is there anything that you have thought of that will keep us all alert? Or
well, the mainstream media needs to start covering
it. Doesn't
this.
work. It's broken.
I think it's broken. So we need more podcasts like this. We need more people coming out to share their stories and tell their stories. We need more people videoing, and that's what has turned out. Like the last No Kings rally turned out millions and millions of people. It grew by 2 or 3 million this last time. And so you are starting to see a resistance, and you are starting to see people organize. You're seeing in communities where a lot of undocumented migrants are, you're seeing people volunteer for their neighbors to take their kids to school so that undocumented person doesn't have to risk that. Maybe it's a mother that's staying home with the kids. We're seeing employers trying to help their employees deal with this a little bit more. So we are seeing resistance, and we have to keep calling them out every single time they lie. From when it's, Chief Bovino's very first raid, where he said every single one was a criminal and a rapist and a murderer, and only one person had a minor criminal violation out of 78 people. They lie constantly. They believe that the propaganda that they put out is just part of this overall warfare that they're doing. They believe that they're at war. Border Patrol agents will tell you that the border, the southern border, is a war zone. They've created this whole detention system with the idea of, we're only going after immigrants, criminal immigrants, and this and that. Well, now we see they're going after non-criminal immigrants. And now we see they're starting to arrest Americans. And it's just going to keep going so that they can keep making more money. It's a never-ending system. The Border Patrol, ICBP, are never going to stop asking for money. Never. They're going to keep getting bigger and bigger.
Thank you for listening to The Raid, available wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about our guests and the subjects we cover, please visit our website at theraidpodcast.org.